Hi, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Joshua.
Today we're going to talk about Iran, cultural revolutions in the Middle East, and the future of world peace.
But before we do, we want to thank all of our listeners out there for tuning in and again ask for your comments, feedback, really anything. Just, help us be better podcasters and we can be those better Can we start over? I sound so desperate.
It's okay, I'll just edit it out.
Fantastic. Even if you don't, I think I've just saved face by acknowledging it. So let's just work with the energy we got then.
Oh, okay. So do you want to start, or?
Yeah. So Iran has been in the news lately because of a big nuclear deal. That's right. Iran is gonna get the go-ahead from the United Nations to, to run some very specific sort of nuclear programs, and I'm just going to pull it up here in case, Andy, in case you have any questions about the nature of the deal.
The way I understood it was that they would cut basically nuclear refineries by 2/3. Is that?
Pulling it up right now. Should have had it already. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'm having trouble finding, a non-tutorialized copy of the deal.
Okay, well, I guess we'll just...
Yeah, okay, here we go. Yeah, we might want to restart after I've got the idea. After I've got it up.
No, let's just continue.
Okay, so... I mean, what the big thing is, there are two main parts to the deal, basically. First of all, sanctions are going to get lifted from Iran. It's a really big deal. And the second part of it is that Iran has to basically cut its nuclear programs. It's got to consent to the inspections, and it's got to not... it's basically got to not be working towards weaponized nuclear capabilities. It's basically a nuclear non-proliferation treaty, a pretty standard one, except that that it's actually more beneficial to Iran because it includes the lifting of economic sanctions against them. But it does ask that they curb the amount of uranium, I believe, that they're enriching at any given time by, pulling back on their facilities.
So, I think a lot of people would argue that it is better for Iran, but I want to play devil's advocate and say that, and at the end of World War II, in contrast to basically Japan, the United States didn't know whether or not Japan would follow through with a disarmament treaty, and subsequently Japan was motivated by economics. Subsequently after World War II, their economy rebounded, and subsequently now they are one of the largest manufacturers of circuit boards and electronics in the world. I think with this treaty, Obama and necessarily his cabinet are attempting to basically motivate Iran economically to join the rest of the world and come in from the cold, much like the end of the Cold War with Russia. And I think that necessarily it'll work. And I think that in addition to that, it will basically motivate the Iranian people to vote the current leadership out, being the radical party that is interested in creating and proliferating nuclear weapons, material, etc. Do you know what
Well, let me stop you right there. The party in control of Iran is actually it's actually conservative party. So they're culturally conservative relative to the relative to the beliefs of Iran, but they're not actually expansive. I mean, militarily they're pretty benign. The only real danger that comes from the Iranian military is that it is very self-sufficient in the economic sense, in part because of the sanctions we placed on them over the years. We, meaning both the global community and America in general. America specifically, rather.
But what I was hinting at was that the current political party in control is supporting and has supported terrorism and basically creating the ambition to create nuclear weapons and lots of other nice things, jokingly, of course.
Right. I mean, it's no secret that Iran, does have ties to. There are Iranians with numerous ties to terrorist groups. It's not really a fact that's ever been, contested. It's just as a nation they don't really like
advertise
foreign,
it. Yeah.
Foreign influences.
Yeah.
Right. They don't like foreign influences policing their country.
I can't.
There's a large difference between developing a nuclear weapon and losing a nuclear weapon.
I meant more in the sense that Iran, if they comply, will not have the nuclear material to produce one warhead, let alone 10.
Yeah. That will be true. I mean, I don't really believe that this deal is going to necessarily make the world safer, but it does represent sort of a step towards progress. And by that I mean, I don't believe that the sanctions placed against Iran will make it impossible for a non-compliant Iran to develop nuclear capabilities. I do, however, believe that it offers an incentive for Iran to cooperate with the international community in a way that has previously been impossible, politically at least, from Iran's perspective. And that's a huge step forward.
And, I mean, we can't, as Americans, necessarily blame them because our government did basically install a dictator into Iran originally, and that is the whole reason we're in this whole mess.
Are we talking about the post-Cold War
The Shah of Iran.
Right, the Shah. So we're talking about the 1953 Iranian coup. Yeah, that was us guilty. The U.S. did that. That's all been declassified.
But anyway, I feel like this is a larger step forward, like you're saying, and subsequently, I understand that Israel is nervous about Iran, but subsequently, the best way to negotiate with an enemy is subsequently to bring in friends of that enemy, if we're going to view them as such, and necessarily try to motivate them towards the negotiating table to be able to basically talk among nations. I mean, the Cold War didn't end when we subsequently slapped sanctions and isolated Russia,
Yeah, no, I mean, actually, that's a very good analogy, because the diplomatic situation especially between the U.S. and Iran was very similar to Cold War Russia, in which for a long time in the U.S. it was sort of it was even taboo to sort of speak about Iran in a way that allowed for a sort of an air of a peaceful future to emerge. But I mean, I think this is the best. This is definitely for the best, though, that we've got um, this treaty in place. Is Israel has their own security as its primary concern, um, and I can understand their worry, but the Iranian military is, I mean, they're at least on paper, the Iranian military
A joke.
is motivated by deterrence, right? That is that's their core strategy. And so the acquisition of nuclear weapons in the first place, from the Iranian perspective, was, I mean, it's a great way to deter, um, to deter war. Um, Especially when you consider that Israel has nukes, Pakistan has nukes, India has nukes.
Well, not confirmed with Israel. There is evidence of nuclear tests, but it's not declassified as
Is it
of
not confirmed?
It is not confirmed.
Really? Wow. All
Uh,
right. So, I mean, I don't have any insider information about that. I mean,
I'm just
I am mistaken.
I'm just speaking from experience that if we're going to get a little bit off topic, that there were tests done with South Africa, with Israel subsequently on an island down there, when Israel was originally researching nuclear weapons.
Okay. I mean, I thought they had enriching the like specifically for enrichment reactors, right?
It
So
is
I thought it
it
was assumed that they had developed them into weapons, but they definitely have, weapons grade, you know, radioactive materials.
Yeah, it's definitely known that they have the capability. It's not known whether or not they
Right.
have warheads.
Okay. So they do have the capability. Okay. Um, I mean, that is an important distinction in, especially if you're considering, Iran's stance, because, a race for actual warheads um, would represent an escalation then in the area if you're to view Israel as the primary threat to Iran. But since Israel isn't really expansionist at its core, I don't think that's sort of a realistic concern. Um, Neither is Iran. Iran isn't expansionist at its core, and so I think this is a good deal. The economic sanctions being lifted, especially, has the potential to have a profoundly positive impact on that nation, but also on the global economy as well.
So,
Iran is a very wealthy nation.
so if I can steer this topic a little bit, what would you
Go
say
ahead.
is a devil's advocate position from a conservative point of view? Necessarily, what is necessarily toxic or not? Uh,
Oh,
what's the word? Flowing well with this deal
I mean,
with
of course,
conservatives.
if we're going to talk about a conservative American political approach, then I mean, of course, any Middle Eastern country is going to be had to be seen with sort of the veiled threat of we don't really understand their culture. One of the greatest sort of threats to the Western world is that we don't truly um, really understand either the religion of Islam or the culture of the Middle East,
So,
or the cultures of the Middle East.
so
And
it's more.
Iran is changing. Iran is a country in flux. It's a living, breathing thing.
So it's more a climate of xenophobia than a rationale to necessarily.
No, I don't see it as very rational because since the 1970s, I've seen a pattern of sort of a lot of free speech sort of movements in Iran. Um, Many of them centered around feminism, but some of them simply, uh, displays of the general sentiments that align with sort of globalism.
Well,
The idea that, religion shouldn't be the deciding factor in politics. There have been some economic public demonstrations, similar to those that were briefly in Turkey, before they sort of became much more socially conservative.
I think
And
I think one of the bigger
yeah.
movements in Iran with social movement is subsequently their acceptance of a person to actually switch genders but not be transsexual. I don't know if you've heard of this.
No, I didn't realize that, but that's actually really wonderful because it's I mean what you've got in Iran is you've got um they still have Sharia law, basically. They
But
have
they
I mean Islam is the core foundation of their legal system.
what they essentially did was the leader of Iran found a passage in the Quran that subsequently made it seem like a gray area in their religion subsequently with a person who has an identity being of the opposite gender and subsequently wanting to be that gender. So they actually perform a surgery on XYZ person, whether they want to be a male or a female, and they're the opposite of that, subsequently. And what ends up happening is you have an interesting relationship because people actually swap identities. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do, and I actually I think that's I mean at least in terms of of what that means, because one of the continuing sort of difficulties that the West has in understanding Iran has been that it's not, you don't have as many civil liberties as a woman traditionally in Iran as you would in the Western world, and this has been significant because that's often used as sort of a benchmark for civil liberties in general, but also as an indicator of how well a sort of a westernized nation will be able to have cultural contact with another nation. Is to look at how, are there women free, and just allowing a more sort of modern and fluid definition of what constitutes gender seems, in my mind, to indicate that, at least in terms of how the Quran is being interpreted, and how the sort of nation is leaning. It's leaning towards a sort of a more modern and sort of a friendlier environment moving forward. I think it's wonderfully significant.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one thing that I think about it, it is it demonstrates Iran's capacity for political change, you know?
Oh, most definitely. And they're anything if I mean, they are so much a very changing nation. They're over the past years they have gone through some pretty radical cultural changes, and really have very much westernized in many ways. Although, in most of the major cities, there is beginning to be a sort of a cultural discrepancy between, how things are outside of the major cities and how things are in the major cities. There are, some parts of Iran where, you don't want to be a woman traveling alone, even if you are, very well clothed and following the laws and the customs of, because you don't have very many rights. But in most of the major cities, though, you do have a much more sort of egalitarian mindset, at least as far as who should have a voice and who is entitled to have a voice, which represents a huge change in that country because, I mean, to have a change like that occur over even 20 years is profound. It took England much longer for feminism to take root, but I mean, then again, that's a whole nother story. It's not. I don't mean to necessarily be praising them for being particularly progressive relative to anyone else.
So, is there anything more we want to say about this topic, or do we want to move on?
I mean, I think we've pretty much set a solid foundation for talking about cultural revolutions in the Middle East.
Okay, cool. Do you want to introduce?
Sure. So, if you've been watching the news, I'm sure you've been, aware of in the past year or so, a number of just really, in some cases, radical changes happening in the Middle East. Syria became very, very conservative culturally, and has in fact all but fallen apart as different sort of radical groups have tried, and in some cases not so radical groups have tried to sort of wrestle for military control of the country. It's still very much a fractured nation. You've got, of course, the wars that the U.S. started having very much changed the governments of Afghanistan and Iraq. But you've also had in Egypt a revolution that for a while there was almost there was some talk, there was some danger of the military seizing control during the interim. There was in Turkey cultural revolutions, and all these different countries in the Middle East basically started having these revolutions, and in many cases, it was about what the role of Islam is in their government, whether it was represented fairly, and in a lot of cases, these revolutions can be seen as the result of population increases, and just sort of demographically, the Middle East is a more diverse place than it ever has been in the past, and governments are every government in the Middle East is finding new ways to deal with the increased diversity.
I also think it speaks to the Middle East's unique position of generally interpreting everything in the sense of religion, subsequently, and either religion moderate, normal or extreme, subsequently, being ISIS or Iraq or, any of the other groups.
I'm not sure I understand. Could you explain
the different?
It is the birthplace of the major monotheistic religions.
I meant to say it. Their government is directly differentiable, being in the different groups, like different levels of religion, and being Islam. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I mean traditionally, almost every government of the Middle East grew out of a religious institution. If you go back as far as the Slavids, I mean, you've got these caliphates that basically laid the foundation for the modern monarchies in both law and their traditional rights. So unlike a country like England, where their monarchy was founded on Christianity, but became sort of a vestigial remnant of a political system that no longer gets used as the country modernized. These countries have been modernizing while their monarchies are still largely intact, and during the last century, what's been happening is these monarchies have actually been the ways that they govern have been changing radically for the last whole century. I'm not just talking about the end of the century, which showed some real interesting cultural revolutions. I'm talking about the sort of the I don't want to say the democratization of the Middle East, but in many cases, the modernization of government in the Middle East has followed a pattern of democratization. Just an increased awareness that that it's the role of government to sort of to coexist with the emerging sort of knowledge that the people might not always tolerate it.
What I meant more was that you have these different revitalizations of these countries, and they're all interpreted through religion. So you have the Muslim Brotherhood, and then you have ISIS, and then you have, after the U.S.'s dictator failed, the Shah of Iran, you have this reinterpretation of Islam with Sharia law, and you have it implemented in their system of governments. You know what I mean?
Well, and what I'm saying is that's because Islam is, with the exception of, of Israel, which is sort of like this little carved, Jewish state, in the middle of a sea of countries that their political system grew out of Islam, out of the very infrastructure of the religion, and so it's it has posed a fascinating sort of political dilemma from us in the West, who are now sort of like we're trying to be progressive when it comes to religion. Whether we're achieving it domestically is, the fact is, especially in the U.S., what we're trying to do is we're trying to make it a place where any religion can flourish.
So, if there's anything you can take away from this, how long do you think it will take the Middle East to modernize if it is in fact engaged in this process?
Oh my God, it's already there, is what I'm trying to say. It's I think us in the West have to sort of scratch our heads and realize that our cultural differences exist, but they're not so great that we can't coexist. And so in that regard, the Middle East has culturally modernized, with the exception of the large swaths of people living in the boonies still stoning people to death. But then again, we have Alabama here in the U.S. No offense to anyone from Alabama, but what I'm trying to get at is that in the major cities, Tehran, Jerusalem, you basically have a climate of religious tolerance, of cultural tolerance, that is formidable. And it doesn't run so deep that you could walk naked down the streets of a city and expect not to get arrested, but there are cultural norms and standards that have to be observed. But the fact is, there's a lot more freedom in the Middle East than there's ever been, and that's true in the main cities especially. Really, only in the large cities. In some ways, it's the rural areas have become a sort of a refuge for all those elements of Islamic culture that don't mesh well with sort of a globalist sort of democracy-friendly ideal world.
So,
but, in terms of how long that we have, I think I think we're very nearly there.
So, I mean, the last thing I want to touch on is, do you think the future of world peace will be affected, and do you think that Iran will be motivated, not Iran specifically, but its people, to elect a moderate government to be able to engage itself geopolitically and not further isolate itself?
That's an interesting question because I don't actually expect Iran to be shifting more towards an actual moderate government. What I do expect is for the conservative government in Iran to continue to make concessions towards based on what the public demonstrates as what they believe is in their collective best interest of the nation. You know, the cultural revolutions in Iran over the past 20 years or so have been very much pro peace, pro freedom of speech, egalitarian, very modern, and basically what all these things have in common is this idea that they're globally acceptable ideals. They're ideals that embrace the personal ideal of liberty, of freedom. And so the fact that the conservative government has been making concessions towards these goals indicates that what is considered conservative in Iran might be changing. I see the next few generations of Iranians, at least those born in the city, as potentially, able to be exposed to a different kind of learning environment than a different kind of education than has ever been, previously offered in that country. The education system is becoming more egalitarian, and it's a very exciting time, I think, because I see real change on the horizon, but I don't think it's going to come in the form that we can necessarily say, oh, they've elected a moderate, because I think politically it will continue to be unfeasible for quite a while for an openly moderate leader to rule the country. However, I do believe that the conservative branch and the conservatives in Iran have demonstrated that they don't want to rule with their head in the sand. They don't want to ignore the discontent of their people. They want to actually embrace the changes globally that have been happening, and especially have been happening in the Middle East with regards towards outcries for civil liberties.
Well, do you think we have exhausted our conversation?
I would like to turn this on its head and ask you, when you think about world peace, what do you imagine? Are you able to imagine a solution, say, to India and Pakistan, or Israel and Palestine? I will toot my own horn by saying I saw this one coming with Iran, but I don't necessarily see solutions for all the world's problems. I'd be curious if you have any sort of insights into any world conflict.
I fear that many conservative parties...
Putting you on the spot, I know.
I fear that many conservative parties in these countries of which have ongoing conflicts are motivated to keep the region destabilized, not agreeing with either side, subsequently, to keep themselves in power. I feel that politicians in this case, it's a feeling of self-interest, and necessarily that they want to continue to be elected, and they feel like if they were to jumpstart a peace process and subsequently, say Israel and Palestine would live peacefully and coexist, and Hamas or whatever terrorist group subsequently in the government would cease to be supported by the people there because it would no longer be needed. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I mean this is an ongoing concern. I mean what jumps to my mind is Pakistan. Is a great example of a country where its politically elected leaders might not have the power to achieve peace without substantial changes to the way that various interest groups within the country approach their own mindset. I mean, the military being a largely conservative institution with power separate in many ways from the central government.
I mean, we saw this with Egypt too, with Morsi that was elected via, I want to call it the Egyptian Revolution. Subsequently.
Oh no, it was very nearly open revolution, and there was some bloodshed over the process of demonstrations, but I mean, thank goodness it wasn't worse. There's there's a lot of change. I mean, even domestically, there's change going on in America. We happen to be living in America, Andy and I. There's change going on every day that, although we aren't openly in a state of political revolution, there's always the possibility that things could change. The world stage is very dynamic. It's very dynamic. But
So
I for one like peace. Andy, I don't know. What do you say? Peace or war?
I enjoy the world to be peaceful as well, considering that, like many others, my family is purely in America because of the Nazis and subsequently their ambitions. So I am for in any situation to basically resolve it peacefully and diplomatically over a wartime solution. I still believe largely that the wartime interests are mainly either politicians that want to continue to be elected or special interest groups that have an interest in keeping oil prices artificially high or, whatever.
Yeah, we won't point fingers there, but I think we all know who we're talking about. I know who we're talking about, at least.
But
If you want to find out who we're talking about, send us a message, and we'll send you the name of the company that benefited from that.
But I think that's also why you see conservatives shooting down the deal. Additionally, some last bits we didn't mention. So gas prices are estimated to shoot down to $1 to $1.50 because of Iran's supply, which will be on the market in 4 to 6 months.
Awesome. That's just good. I mean, that's just happy news. I don't know anyone who would be sad about that.
But yeah. Well, I can name a few, but let's leave them out of this.
No, I want to. Who could possibly be sad about gas prices going down? Literally everyone I know complains about gas prices.
I was more speaking about the corporate interests that we mentioned before.
I mean, aside from like the Drill Alaska Foundation or whatever, I mean, like, I don't know. I shouldn't throw stones in glass houses at people who I don't know who we're talking about.
Yeah, well, let's go with the Harry Potter native, where we're like, he who shall not be named.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to, give them power by. I really don't know who we're talking about. We should probably wrap it up.
Yeah, well, we're pretty much burned out of this discussion, so
Oh yeah, that was a back-to-back podcast. If you were listening, we just did two right in a row.
So I'm Andrew, and
I'm Josh.
And this has been a Tugol podcast. We hope again that you enjoy listening, and write us your comments, suggestions,
Thank you.
hate mail, whatever you want to do.
Send us small voodoo dolls that you make yourself from trees that you have carved down to tiny little voodoo dolls.
Yeah, and definitely, and a shout out to the NSA and CSIS. We hope you guys love what you're hearing. You can just ask our opinion, to be honest, and listen to this, or...
We're friendly people.
But, I guess that's it, so, signing off.